No man ever kept his word to me, she said, her voice thin as prairie smoke. So don't stand there and pretend you'll be different. He looked at her a long moment before he answered. Then he took off his hat, held it against his chest like a man at a graveside, and said only this, "Then I'll be the first, ma'am, and the last." Redemption Falls, Wyoming Territory, the autumn of 1878. The wind that came down off the bighorns that season carried the smell of iron and coming snow, and it rattled the loose shingles of the overland stage depot where Clara Whitfield stood clutching a carpetbag that held everything she still owned in the world, which was not much. A tintype of a mother she barely remembered. A Bible with a lock of hair pressed inside Ecclesiastes. 2 dresses, both mended. And a folded letter, read so many times the creases had worn through to nothing, from a man named Elias Rourke who had promised her a home. What Clara did not know, what nobody in Redemption Falls yet knew, was that the tall, gray-eyed rancher drying his hands on a rag by the stagecoach horses was not Elias Rourke. He had never written her a single word. And he had ridden 9 years and 400 miles for reasons he had not yet found the courage to tell her. She had come west because she had run out of eastern places to hide. That was the plain truth of it, though she would not have said so aloud. Clara Whitfield was 26 years old, and in her 26 years 3 men had given her their word and 3 men had broken it. Her father, who had promised to come home from the war and had not. Her guardian uncle, who had promised she would inherit the small farm at Millbrook and had sold it out from under her instead. And Jonas Pettigrew of Boston, who had promised to marry her in the spring of 1876 and had married a banker's daughter in the summer of the same year, leaving Clara with a ring returned by post and a reputation whispered against in every parlor she entered. So when the advertisement had appeared in the Matrimonial Times, respectable rancher, Wyoming Territory 34, seeks a woman of good character for lawful marriage. Kindness offered. Kindness expected. She had answered it not out of hope but out of exhaustion. Hope was a thing she had buried. What she wanted now was only a roof, a door that locked, and to be left alone until she died. The letters that came back had been beautiful. Elias Rourke wrote of a small stone house he had built with his own hands, of a creek that ran cold and clean past the kitchen window, of cottonwoods that turned gold in October. He wrote that he was not a man of many words but that the words he gave he kept. He asked her nothing about her past. He said only, "Come and we will begin." She had cried when she read that letter. She had not cried in nearly 2 years. Now the stagecoach had gone on to Casper without her, the dust of it settling on her skirts, and the man who stepped forward to meet her was not smiling and not frowning. He was watching her the way a man watches a wounded animal he means not to startle. "Miss Whitfield," he said. His voice was low and unhurried.
"I'm Sam Callahan."
"Elias sent me." She felt something inside her chest go very still. "Sent you," she repeated. "To fetch you," he said. "The ranch is a hard ride from here." Elias couldn't come himself. He held out his hand for her carpetbag, and when she did not give it, he did not press. He only lowered his hand and waited. "When will he come?" she said. Sam Callahan looked past her, up the long dirt street where the false-fronted buildings leaned into the wind, and something moved in his jaw. "Tonight," he said. "God willing. We'll ride out slow." He was lying. She could tell he was lying the way a woman who has been lied to enough times comes to tell. But she was too tired to fight it, and she had nowhere else on earth to go. So she gave him her carpetbag and let him help her up onto the buckboard, and she did not speak again for the 11 miles between town and the stone house on Cottonwood Creek. She only tucked a stray dark curl behind her ear and stared at the horizon, where the bighorn stood blue and enormous and did not care about her at all. Sam Callahan drove with the reins loose in his weathered hands and did not fill the silence. Once, when they crossed a shallow ford and the wagon jarred hard, he steadied her elbow, and she flinched so sharply he drew his hand back as though he had touched a hot stove. He said, "Beg pardon, ma'am," and did not touch her again for the rest of the ride. She noticed, without meaning to, that he had taken off his hat when he spoke to her at the depot and had not put it back on until they were half a mile out of town. The stone house sat exactly where the letters had said it sat. A creek ran cold past the kitchen window. Cottonwoods stood gold and shivering at the yard's edge. A barn, a smokehouse, a corral with 3 good horses in it. Smoke rising from the chimney thin and blue. It was beautiful. And it was empty. Where is he? Clara asked, when Sam Callahan lifted her carpetbag down and set it on the porch. Where is Elias? Sam did not answer at once. He set his hat on the porch rail. He looked at her, and she saw for the first time, in the clean afternoon light, that his gray eyes were not cold at all. They were only very tired, and very sorry. Miss Whitfield, he said, Elias Rourke is buried under the 3rd cottonwood. Yonder. He has been for going on 2 years. The wind came off the creek and lifted the hem of her dress. She did not move. She did not blink. Then who, she said, wrote me those letters? Sam Callahan lowered his eyes to the porch boards, and when he raised them again there was something in them she did not yet know how to name. I did, ma'am, he said. God forgive me. I did. She should have struck him. She thought about it, standing there on the porch with the wind pulling at her hair, and she felt her hand twitch at her side the way it used to twitch when she was a girl and her uncle had said something cruel. But she did not strike him. She was too far from anywhere, and she had learned young that a woman who hits a man in a country empty of witnesses may not live to hit another. Instead she said very quietly, "Take me back to town."
Mom.
"Take me back to town, Mr. Callahan. Tonight." He nodded once, slow, as if he had expected exactly this and had made his peace with it on the ride out. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'll hitch the team fresh. It'll be after dark before we reach Redemption Falls. There's stew on the stove. I'd be obliged if you'd eat something first. You've come a long way." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to stand on that porch until he brought the wagon around and never set foot inside a house built by a dead man and paid for by a lie. But the wind was cold and her hands were shaking and she had not eaten since Cheyenne, and pride, she had learned, was a luxury for people with somewhere to sleep. She stepped inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something clean, like lye soap and cedar. A round table stood by the window, a rocking chair by the hearth, a shelf of books, real books, not just the Bible, and a rifle above the door. There was a jar of dried lavender on the mantel, and Clara realized, with a small painful jolt, that a man who lived alone did not usually keep dried lavender on his mantel unless he was waiting for someone to be pleased by it. Sam Callahan ladled stew into a tin bowl and set it before her without a word. Bread, butter, a cup of coffee, black. Then he took his own bowl to the far end of the table, as far from her as the table allowed, and sat down and did not eat until she had lifted her spoon. They ate in silence. She would remember that silence for the rest of her life, and later, she would wish she had understood, that first night, what he was already suffering. When she had finished, she set down her spoon and folded her hands and said, "I would like to know why." He looked up. He had not eaten much. His gray eyes were steady. "You would have the right to know," he said. "But it's a long telling, and it will not comfort you, and I don't reckon it will change your mind about riding back to town. So I'll say this much and no more unless you ask again. Elias Rourke was my brother. Half-brother. He was a good man, and I loved him better than I loved myself. He put that advertisement in the paper the spring before he died. He wrote you the first 3 letters. When he was killed. Thrown from a horse, ma'am, if it matters. I found the letters half-written on his desk, and yours already in the drawer, and I could not." He stopped. He set his hands flat on the table. "I could not bear to write and tell you he was dead. I did not know you, but I had read your letters and I knew the sort of woman who wrote them, and I knew what a letter like mine would do to her, on top of whatever had already been done. So I answered as him. I meant only to soften the blow. I meant to write and say he was ill, and then that he was worse, and then finally that he was gone, and to send you money for the passage back east. I meant it kindly, ma'am. It was not kindly done. But it was meant kindly." She stared at him. "And instead you told me to come." "I did not tell you to come," he said. "The last letter, I burned 3 drafts of the last letter. I could not make my hand write the word come. Elias had written it back in May before he—" Sam's voice caught, and he looked down at the table, and she saw the knuckles of his right hand go white. "The last letter you received, Miss Whitfield, was written by my brother. I only sent it. I sent it because—" He stopped again. Because, she said. Because I am a coward, ma'am, he said, and I could not bring myself to finish what I had started. And because, he looked up at her, and there was something raw and unfinished in his face. Because when I read your letters back, I thought a woman who wrote what you wrote deserved to see the house he built for her. Even if he was not in it. Even for one night. So she would know she had been wanted. It was wrong of me. I know it was wrong. I have known it every day for 11 months. She did not answer. He said, I'll hitch the team. He rose and set his hat on his head and went out through the door, and she heard his boots go slow across the porch and then quicker across the yard. She sat alone at the table in the stone house on Cottonwood Creek and looked at the jar of dried lavender on the mantel, and she thought very clearly and without any feeling at all, so this is what it is to be a fool for the 4th time. Then she thought of the 11 miles back to town in the dark, and the empty room above the depot, and the stagecoach east that she could not afford, and she began, quietly and furiously, to cry. On the frontier, kindness was a rarer weather than rain, and it fell most often on the ones who had given up expecting it. She did not go back to town that night. Sam Callahan hitched the team as he had promised and drove it around to the porch, and he stood in the yard with his hat in his hands and waited, and when at last she came to the door he saw her red eyes and did not remark on them. It's near dark, she said, and your horses are tired. They'll make it, ma'am. They'll make it, she said, but I don't wish to arrive in Redemption Falls at midnight with nowhere to go and be taken for what I am not. I'll sleep here tonight. In there. She nodded at what she took to be Elias's room, the door of which stood closed at the end of the short hall. You will sleep in the barn. Yes, ma'am. I will leave in the morning. Yes, ma'am. And you will not speak to me between now and then except to say what must be said. Yes, ma'am, he said. And he tipped his hat, and he unhitched the team, and he did not speak to her again that night. She lay in Elias Rourke's bed in Elias Rourke's shirt because she could not bear to sleep in her traveling dress, and the shirt smelled of cedar and of a man she had never met and would never meet, and she cried again quietly into a stranger's pillow. Outside, an owl called from the cottonwoods. Somewhere near the barn, a man she did not trust and could not fully hate was, she suspected, not sleeping either. Morning came slow and gray. Frost lay in the yard. When she stepped out onto the porch in her mended blue dress, Sam Callahan was already at the corral, saddling one of the horses. He had built up the stove. There was coffee. There was bread and butter and a bowl of stewed apples on the table, and beside her plate a folded paper. She opened the paper. It was a bank draft. $200. Enough to carry her back east 3 times over. It was signed in a plain, careful hand. Samuel J. Callahan. She stood at the table a long time. Then she folded the paper very small, and she put it in the pocket of her dress, and she went out onto the porch and said across the yard, Mr. Callahan, come inside and eat before we ride. He looked at her over the horse's back. His face did not change, but he set the saddle down slowly and he came. They ate in silence again. She did not thank him for the money. He did not expect her to. When they had finished, she said, I will accept the draft as a loan, not as charity. I will pay it back when I am able. As you please, ma'am. And I would like to see the grave, she said. Before we go. Something in his throat moved. Yes, ma'am. He walked her to the 3rd cottonwood. There was a stone there, plain, hand-cut. Elias John Rourke. 1844 to 1877. Beloved brother. Kept his word. She stood a long time looking at those last 3 words. The wind moved in the cottonwood above them and shook down a slow rain of small gold leaves onto her shoulders and her hair. He would have kept it to you also, ma'am, Sam Callahan said quietly. If he had lived. I know, she said. And she found, to her own astonishment, that she did know it. Something about the stone house, the lavender, the careful weight of the letters, she knew. She turned to Sam Callahan. He had his hat in his hands again. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the grave. Mr. Callahan, she said, I am going to ask you a question, and you are going to answer it plain. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am. When you wrote those letters as him, the ones after his death, the ones where you spoke of the creek and the cottonwoods, and the kind of woman a man hopes to grow old with, were those Elias's words or were they yours? He was silent so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, without looking at her, "They were mine, ma'am. God help me. They were mine." She nodded slowly. She tucked a stray dark curl behind her ear. She said, "Take me to town, Mr. Callahan. I have things to think on." They rode into Redemption Falls in the early afternoon. Sam took her to the boarding house of a Mrs. Ada Finch, a widow with kind eyes and no questions, and he paid a week in advance out of his own pocket over Clara's stiff protest. He set her carpetbag inside the door. He tipped his hat. "If you need anything, ma'am," he said, "Mrs. Finch knows how to send word out to the ranch. I'll come at once." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Miss Whitfield." He turned to go. On the porch step he paused, and he did not turn back, but he said over his shoulder, "For what it's worth, ma'am, I am sorry. Not for the letters. I am sorry I did not have the courage to sign my own name to them." Then he was gone, boots on the boardwalk, and Clara Whitfield stood in the small clean parlor of Mrs. Finch's boarding house and did not know whether she wanted to laugh or weep or ride out to Cottonwood Creek and demand the rest of the story that he had not yet told. She had come to Wyoming territory to be finished with hoping, and a man had just handed her, very carefully and without asking anything of her, a small and dangerous hope, wrapped in his own dead brother's shirt. She did not know yet that she had also come to a town where a certain Mr. Harlan Beaufort, land agent, was about to notice her arrival with a great deal of interest. She did not know that Elias Rourke had died owing a debt that had never quite been paid off, and that the note was held by a man who did not consider the matter closed. She did not know that Sam Callahan slept every night in the barn now, and had not slept a full night in the stone house since the day he had buried his brother. She did not know any of it yet, but she would. She stayed in Redemption Falls a full week before she rode back out to Cottonwood Creek. In that week she ate Mrs. Finch's biscuits, and mended 2 of the widow's aprons in exchange for board, and walked the length of the little town 3 times a day to learn its shape. She learned that the Methodist church was small and whitewashed, and that the preacher, one Reverend Amos Doyle, had a gentle face and had known Elias Rourke well. She learned that the mercantile was run by a bald man named Petrie who watered his molasses. She learned that the saloon at the far end of the street was called the Silver Spur, and that on Thursdays it was quiet and that on Saturdays it was not. And she learned, without meaning to learn it, that everyone in Redemption Falls spoke of Sam Callahan the way one speaks of a good dog who has been kicked too often, with a kind of protective, low-voiced respect. "Rides the North Line by himself since Eli passed," said Mrs. Finch one evening, pouring tea. "Won't take a hired hand though he needs one. Won't sit in the front pew though he was raised in it. Comes to town twice a month, buys what he needs and rides out. He was a talker once, before." "Not now." "Before what?" Clara asked carefully. Mrs. Finch looked at her a long moment over the teapot. "Before his brother died, child," she said. "But I expect that isn't the whole of it. I expect there was more." Clara did not press. But that night, in the narrow, clean bed under Mrs. Finch's eaves, she took out the bank draft and unfolded it and looked at the signature.
Samuel J. Callahan.
Written in the same steady hand as the letters. The next morning she walked to the small church and knocked on the parsonage door. Reverend Amos Doyle received her with grave courtesy and did not seem surprised that she had come. He was a thin man of about 60, with white hair and a farmer's hands, and he made her tea and offered her seed cake and waited for her to speak. "Reverend," she said, "did you know Elias Rourke?" "I did. I buried him." "And do you know his brother?" "I know Sam very well, Miss Whitfield." "Then tell me, please, everything you are permitted to tell me. I have come a very long way, and I have been given only half a story, and I mean to know the rest before I make any decision." The old preacher set down his cup. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Child, what did Sam tell you?" She told him. She told him about the letters and the grave, and the $200, and the shirt that smelled of cedar. She spoke plainly, and she did not cry, and when she had finished the Reverend passed a hand across his face and said, Ah, that boy." He said, Clara said, that he wrote as his brother out of cowardice and kindness. "Was that true?" "That is true," the Reverend said, "and it is not the whole truth." "Then tell me the whole." Reverend Doyle rose and went to the window, and looked out at the yellow cottonwoods along the church fence, and did not turn back to her while he spoke. Sam Callahan was in love with the woman his brother meant to marry, Miss Whitfield. Before there was ever a woman. Do you understand me? He read your first letter, the one Elias showed him at supper, laughing about it, delighted with it, and he told me himself, sitting in this very room, that he had never in his life read anything that made him feel more understood. He said, Amos, my brother has found the finest woman east of the Mississippi, and I am going to spend the rest of my life being glad of it for his sake, and I will never say a word of what I feel to any living soul. Clara sat very still. And then Elias died, the Reverend said. And Sam had, in his hands, the letters of a woman he had come to care for without ever having met her, and a promise made by a dead man that he did not know how to break, and a house Elias had built for her that stood empty, and a bank draft Elias had left in his will, expressly, for her passage west, whether Elias lived to greet her or not. He said nothing of that, Clara said. He would not, the Reverend said. It is the money he gave you yesterday, child. It has been sitting in Elias's box for nearly 2 years. Sam has not spent $1 of it. He has added to it out of his own wages every quarter. She could not speak. So when Sam Callahan wrote to you as his brother, the Reverend said, gently, he was not only sparing you the news of a death. He was also, and I say this with sorrow because I have watched him carry it, trying to give you the home Elias had promised without giving you himself, without letting you know he existed at all. He meant, I believe, to set you up in that stone house and take himself off to Montana. He told me so last Christmas. He said, when she comes, Amos, I'll be gone before the wagon reaches the gate. She'll never know I was there. But he was there, Clara whispered. He met the stage. Yes, said Reverend Doyle. He did. And I asked him why, and do you know what he said? She shook her head. The old man turned from the window at last. His eyes were wet. He said, because a woman like that ought not to arrive in a strange country and find no one waiting for her. Not for 1 hour. Not for 1 minute. It is the least I can do for my brother. And here, child, he looked at me and I saw his heart in his face. It is the last thing I will ever do for myself. Clara Whitfield sat in the parsonage of the Methodist Church in Redemption Falls, Wyoming Territory, and she covered her face with her hands, and for the first time in a great many years she wept not from grief but from something else entirely, something she did not have a name for yet, though she suspected she would learn one soon. Outside the parsonage window, the cottonwoods let down their gold leaves onto the packed dirt street, one by one, unhurried, the way a country lets down its guard only for those who have earned the right to see it. She rode out to Cottonwood Creek the next morning. She rode alone, on a rented mare from the livery, and she wore her mended blue dress and Mrs. Finch's gray woolen shawl, and she carried the bank draft folded in her pocket. She did not send word ahead. She wanted to see him as he lived, unwarned. She found him mending fence along the north line. He was in his shirt sleeves, though the morning was cold. His hat lay on a fence post. His hands were bleeding a little from the wire. When he saw her ride up, he went very still, the way a deer goes still, and then he set down his pliers and reached for his hat and put it on and took it off again, all in one motion, as if his body could not decide which courtesy to offer first. Miss Whitfield. Mr. Callahan. She dismounted. She did not tie the mare. She walked to the fence and stood on the other side of it from him, the two of them separated by 3 strands of wire, and she said, I have spoken to Reverend Doyle. He did not answer. His gray eyes went past her to the horizon, and she saw the muscle in his jaw work once. Is it true? She said. Ma'am, he said, whatever Amos told you. Is it true, Mr. Callahan? He was silent for the space of 10 heartbeats. She counted them. Then he said quietly, yes, ma'am. It is true. She nodded slowly. She reached into her pocket and took out the folded bank draft. She held it up between 2 fingers. This money, she said. Elias meant it for me? He did, ma'am. And you have added to it every quarter. Yes, ma'am. Why? He looked at her then, full on, and he did not soften it. Because, he said, if you had come and hated the country, or hated the house, or hated the memory of a man you never met, I wanted you to be able to leave it. Freely. without owing any living soul. Not me. Not the ranch. Not even the ground he is buried in. A woman ought to be able to leave, Miss Whitfield. Any woman, but especially one who has been made to stay in places she did not choose. She looked at him a long moment over the top of the fence. Mr. Callahan, she said, I am going to ask you one more thing, and I would be obliged if you would answer it as plain as you answered the last. Yes, ma'am. If I stay, she said, in that stone house, not as your wife, Mr. Callahan, I am not speaking of that, not yet and perhaps not ever, but if I stay and keep the house and work the garden and pay you back your $200 out of butter and eggs and mending until the debt is clear, will you stop sleeping in the barn? He stared at her. Mom. Because it is a foolish thing, she said, and her voice shook only a little. For a grown man to sleep in a barn in a Wyoming winter on account of a woman he does not intend to trouble. I have troubled men before, Mr. Callahan, and none of them ever slept in a barn over it. I would not have you be the first. Something happened in his face. It was very small. It was the kind of thing a person would miss if she were not watching for it. He said, I will sleep in the house, ma'am, if you will have me there. On the far side of it. Behind a closed door. I will not trouble you. I know you will not, Mr. Callahan, she said. That is precisely why I am asking. The wind moved in the wire between them. Somewhere down along the creek a magpie called. He looked at her, and he did not smile exactly, but the line of his mouth went a little easier than she had yet seen it, and he said, Miss Whitfield. Yes, Mr. Callahan. I would like, with your permission, to remove my hat, because I have something to say to you, and I would prefer to say it bareheaded. You may. He took off his hat. He held it against his chest the way he had at the depot. I gave my brother, he said, on the day I buried him, my word, that if his bride ever came west I would treat her as I would treat my own kin. I mean to keep that word, Miss Whitfield. Whatever comes of it. If you stay 1 week or 1 year or 50 years, or if you go tomorrow, I will keep it. That is all. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Mum. She turned and mounted the mare and rode back to Redemption Falls, and did not look back once, though she knew, as certainly as she had ever known anything, that he stood by the fence with his hat in his hands and watched her until she was a small dark shape against the yellow cottonwoods and then nothing at all. The name on the deed to the ranch was not, in fact, the name she had been given at the altar of Elias Rourke's letters. But she would not learn that for some weeks yet, and by then the trouble it would bring was already riding hard toward Cottonwood Creek. She moved out to the stone house on the first day of November. Sam Callahan drove her out in the buckboard with her carpetbag and a small trunk of things she had bought at Petrie's Mercantile on credit: flour, sugar, cornmeal, dried apples, a bolt of unbleached cotton, a paper of needles, a tin of tea. He carried her things inside. He set them where she pointed. He built up the fire. He said, "There's a bed in the small room off the kitchen, ma'am. I've moved my things there. The larger room is yours." And then he tipped his hat and went out to see to the horses and did not come back into the house until she called him for supper. That was how it began. She cooked. He chopped wood. She swept and beat the rugs and washed the windows with vinegar until the glass sang. He mended the corral and repaired the smokehouse and shot a deer for the winter's meat. They ate together at the round table by the window morning and night, and they did not speak much at first, and when they did speak it was of small things: the weather, the mare's foreleg, whether the cottonwoods would drop before the first snow. He removed his hat every time he came through the door. Every time. She noticed. She did not remark on it. But on the fourth evening, when he came in stamping snow off his boots and forgot, for a moment, in his cold, stiffened hands, to lift his hat, she said, without looking up from the biscuit dough, "Mr. Callahan, your hat." He froze. He lifted his hat. He said, "Beg pardon, ma'am." She looked up at him then, and her eyes were kinder than her voice, and she said, "I only remark on it because I have grown accustomed to it. Do not stop on my account." He put his hat on the peg by the door, and he did not meet her eyes, and he did not stop. Winter came in earnest the second week of November. Snow fell thick and slow and did not lift, and the wind out of the north was a live, cruel thing that hunted the seams of the stone house and found them. Clara learned to bank the fire so it would hold through the night. She learned to break the ice on the water bucket with the back of an axe. She learned that a man who has slept alone in a barn for 2 years does not know, at first, how to sit easy in a warm kitchen with a woman across from him, and that if you leave him be and pour his coffee without comment, and pass him the bread without asking, he will slowly, over the course of many evenings, begin to breathe again. They spoke, by degrees, of larger things. He told her about Elias. Not the sorrow of him, but the boy of him, the way Eli had once tried to ride a milk cow at the age of 8 and had been thrown into a cow paddy and laughed so hard he cried. She told him about her mother's hymn book and the tintype in her carpet bag. He told her the names of the 3 horses in the corral, Sunday, Blue, and Pilgrim. She told him she had never in her life ridden a horse further than 3 miles, and he said gravely, "Then we will start at 2, ma'am, and we will not go further until you say." He taught her to ride on Sunday, who was old and forgiving. She fell once into a snowbank, and he was off Pilgrim and at her side before she had drawn breath. He did not touch her. He knelt in the snow 6 feet away and said, "Are you hurt, Miss Whitfield?" "Only my dignity, Mr. Callahan."
Dignity means, Mom.
"So I am told." She rose and dusted herself off and remounted, and by the end of the afternoon she could sit a trot without losing her seat, and by the end of the week she could ride to the North Gate and back alone. He watched her go and come without ever once calling after her to be careful, and she understood, without his saying so, that this was his kindness, that he would not treat her as a thing to be guarded when she had come all this way to stop being one. She tucked a stray dark curl behind her ear more often now, and less because she was nervous. The trouble came on a gray Thursday in the first week of December. A man rode up the lane on a lathered black horse and did not dismount. He wore a fine dark coat and a townsman's hat, and he had a fleshy smiling face that did not reach his eyes. Sam Callahan came out of the barn at the sound of hooves, and Clara watched from the kitchen window, and she saw Sam's shoulders set in a way she had not seen them set before. The 2 men spoke briefly. Then Sam turned and walked to the porch and called, evenly, "Miss Whitfield, would you come out, please?" She came. "Ma'am," Sam said, "this is Mr. Harlan Beaufort, land agent out of Cheyenne. He has business he says concerns you." Mr. Beaufort smiled at her from the saddle. He touched the brim of his hat but did not remove it, and Clara, who had lived 4 weeks in a house where a man removed his hat for her every single time, felt the small hot flicker of an insult she had not felt in years. "Miss Whitfield," said Mr. Beaufort. "Pleasure. I understand you are the intended of the late Mr. Elias Rourke." "I was, sir." "Then I regret to inform you," he said, still smiling, "that the deed to this parcel of land is not, in fact, Mr. Rourke's to bequeath. It was signed against a loan taken out in the winter of '76. The loan was not repaid. The land, therefore, is mine." Clara did not speak. Sam Callahan did not speak. The wind moved in the cottonwoods. "Now," said Mr. Beaufort warmly, "I am a reasonable man, ma'am. I do not wish to turn a lady out into the snow. I am prepared to offer you the courtesy of remaining in the house through the winter, as my tenant, in exchange for a modest arrangement between us. I think you understand my meaning." She did understand his meaning. She understood it entirely. She was aware, without looking, of Sam Callahan going very still beside her. She stepped forward. She stepped past Sam. She walked down the porch steps into the snowy yard until she stood at Mr. Beaufort's stirrup, and she looked up at him with her clear dark eyes and she said, in a voice as level as a plumb line, "Mr. Beaufort, my name is Clara Whitfield. I was born in Millbrook, Massachusetts in the spring of 1852, and I have been lied to by better men than you. If you have a paper, produce it. If you do not have a paper, ride out. And if you ever again address me on my own porch with your hat on your head, I will not answer for what the man behind me does." Mr. Beaufort's smile faltered. He looked past her at Sam Callahan. Sam Callahan was already standing on the top step of the porch with his hat off, held as always against his chest, and his other hand resting easy on the stock of the Winchester that had been leaning inside the door and was now, somehow, in his grip. "Mr. Beaufort," Sam said, quietly, "you heard the lady." Harlan Beaufort produced no paper. He tipped his hat, removed it this time and made a small ironic bow, and he turned his lathered horse and rode back down the lane at a pace considerably more careful than the one he had arrived at. Sam Callahan lowered the rifle. He set it back inside the door. He put on his hat and took it off again. He said, without looking at her, Miss Whitfield, "Are you well?" "I am well, Mr. Callahan." "I did not know," he said, "about any loan." "I know you did not. If there is a paper." "There is not a paper," she said, "or he would have shown it." "He was fishing, Mr. Callahan. He was fishing to see whether a woman new to the country and a man who does not like to speak could be moved off a piece of good bottomland by the sound of a fine coat and a townsman's smile. He will come back. He will come back with a paper or with men or with both. And when he does, we shall be ready." Sam Callahan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "We, Miss Whitfield?" She looked at him. She had not meant to say it. It had come out of her mouth as easy as breath. She said, "Yes, Mr. Callahan." He did not answer, but he took off his hat, though he had only just put it on, and he held it against his chest, and he inclined his head once gravely, the way a man inclines his head at a graveside, or at an altar, or before a thing he means to guard the rest of his life without asking it for anything. Winter deepened. Mr. Harlan Beaufort did not return that week, nor the next. But Sam Callahan rode into Redemption Falls and spoke privately with Reverend Doyle, and with a lawyer named Whitcomb who kept an office above the Mercantile, and he brought back a thick envelope of papers that Clara did not ask to see but suspected were the true and unencumbered deed to Cottonwood Creek, signed by Elias Rourke's own hand in the spring of 1876 and lodged with the territorial recorder in Cheyenne 2 months before any loan Beaufort might invent. They did not speak of it. They did not need to. They spoke instead, over the long dark evenings, of other things. He told her, one snowy night, about the war. He had been a boy of 17 at Chickamauga. He did not say much. He did not need to. She told him, another night, about Jonas Pettigrew of Boston, and the ring returned by post, and the whispers in the parlors, and how she had thought, for a long time, that the fault must lie in her, because it lay always in the same place, in her, no matter which man had done the leaving. He listened without moving. When she had finished, he said quietly, "Ma'am, the fault lay in them. Every one of them. I have known it since the first letter you wrote." She did not answer. She could not. She only tucked a stray dark curl behind her ear and looked at her hands, and after a while he rose and banked the fire and said good night and went to his room and closed the door. She sat by the fire a long time after he had gone. She thought, "I did not come here to love a man. I came here to stop needing to," she thought. And yet, Christmas passed quietly. He gave her a wooden comb he had carved himself out of cottonwood, wrapped in a scrap of the unbleached cotton. She gave him a pair of thick wool mittens she had knitted in secret in the evenings after he had gone to bed. They ate roasted goose and drank coffee laced with a little of Mrs. Finch's brandy, and they read aloud, taking turns, from the book of Ruth, because it was the passage he loved best. And when she read the words, "Whither thou goest, I will go," she found her voice unsteady, and she did not look up from the page. He did not look up either. Harlan Beaufort came back on the 15th of January with 3 men and a paper. The paper was a forgery. Whitcomb the lawyer, whom Sam had summoned by rider the night before, examined it in the yard in front of witnesses and pronounced it so, in language plain enough that even Beaufort's hired men understood. One of the hired men, a lean boy of maybe 19 with frightened eyes, laid down his rifle in the snow before a shot was fired, and the other 2, seeing the boy do it, and seeing Sam Callahan on the porch with his Winchester easy in his hands and Reverend Doyle himself standing witness beside the lawyer, thought better of the day's work and rode off without their employer. Harlan Beaufort was arrested by the territorial marshal 3 days later in a hotel in Cheyenne on charges of forgery and attempted fraud. He was tried in the spring. He was convicted. He served 4 years in the territorial prison at Laramie and afterward, it was said, went to California and was not heard of again. His name is not important to this story. It is only important that he came and that he went, and that in the going he left Clara Whitfield and Sam Callahan standing side by side on the porch of the stone house at Cottonwood Creek, still there, still whole and still, though neither of them had yet said the word aloud, no longer alone. On the frontier, love did not announce itself. It arrived the way spring arrived, one small green thing at a time, unremarked, until one morning a person looked up and found the whole country had changed. Spring came late that year. It came on a Tuesday in the middle of April, with a warm wind out of the south that lifted the last of the snow off the north slope in a single day. Clara stood on the porch in the early evening and watched the meadow beyond the creek go from white to brown to the first, faint, impossible green. Sam Callahan came up from the barn with his sleeves rolled and his hat in his hand, and he stood beside her on the porch, not touching her, only standing. "Mr. Callahan," she said after a while.
Mom.
"I have been thinking," she said, "that a woman who has lived under a man's roof for 6 months and owes him $200 ought, in Christian decency, to either pay her debt or marry him." He did not turn his head. He kept his eyes on the far meadow. "Miss Whitfield," he said quietly, "I have never asked you for either. I know you have not, Mr. Callahan. That is precisely why I am raising the matter myself." He was silent a long moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, I would not have you marry me out of Christian decency. I did not say I was proposing to." He turned then. He looked at her. His gray eyes were very steady. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "say plain what you are proposing to." She looked up at him. She tucked a stray dark curl behind her ear, and then, deliberately, she left her hand there, along the line of her jaw, and she said, "Mr. Callahan, when I stepped off the stagecoach in Redemption Falls last October, I told you that no man had ever kept his word to me. Do you remember?" "I remember, ma'am. I remember every word of it." "And you told me," she said, "that you would be the first and the last." "I did. Have you kept it?" He did not answer at once. He looked at her, and his hands hung quiet at his sides, and she saw his throat move. "I have tried, ma'am," he said. "God knows I have tried." "You have kept it," she said. "Every hour of every day, Mr. Callahan. From the depot to this porch, you have kept it." "I did not believe such a thing was possible. I do now." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were wet, and he did not look away, and he did not try to hide it. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Sam," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. She saw him hear it. She saw his shoulders lower a full inch, as though a load he had been carrying since Chickamauga had finally, quietly, been set down. "Sam," she said again, "I am not asking you to marry me tonight, and I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am asking you only this. If I stay, not as a debtor, not as a guest, not as your brother's bride, but as a woman who has chosen, freely and in her right mind, to stay, will you have me?" He took off his hat. He held it against his chest. His hand shook only a little. "Clara," he said, and his voice was low and even and unhurried, and it was, she realized, the voice from the letters. It had been his voice all along. "I would have you if you came to me with nothing at all. I would have you if you came to me in rags. I would have you," he said, "if you came to me tomorrow and said you had changed your mind and only wished me to drive you to the stage. I would have you then. I will have you now. I will have you, God willing, when we are both old and gray under those cottonwoods yonder. That is the plain of it, and I will not dress it up finer." She reached up. She took his hat gently out of his hand. She set it on the porch rail, and she stepped into him, and she laid her cheek against the rough, clean cotton of his shirt, and she felt his arms come around her at last, careful as a man handling something he has waited half his life to touch, and she closed her eyes. Behind them, the sun went down over the bighorns in a long, slow spill of gold, and the first frogs of the year began to sing along Cottonwood Creek, and the stone house Elias Rourke had built for a woman he never met stood warm and lit in the blue spring dusk, and it was, at last, a home. They were married by Reverend Doyle on the first Sunday in June, under the third cottonwood, with Mrs. Ada Finch as witness and half of Redemption Falls in attendance. Clara wore a dress of pale blue calico she had sewn herself. Sam wore a clean white shirt and his father's silver watch. When the Reverend asked him for his vow, Sam Callahan looked down at the woman standing beside him and said, in a voice clear enough to carry to the fence line, "I gave you my word, Clara, on the day you stepped off the stage. I said I would be the first man to keep it, and the last man you would ever need. I mean to be both. So help me God." And Clara Whitfield, who had come west with nothing and had, without meaning to, found everything, looked up at him through the small gold leaves already beginning to sift down out of the tree that shaded her first husband's grave, and she smiled, the first full, unguarded smile of her 27 years, and she said, simply, "Then be them, Sam. Be them both." On the frontier, a promise kept was a rarer thing than gold, and worth more than any deed. And a man who kept his word to a woman who had stopped believing in words, that man built a country, one quiet hour at a time.